Jacob did nothing to get to God. Neither did Esau. We don't do anything to get to God if we're left to ourselves. The way Jacob got to God is that God's grace drew him. God's grace brought him. Of course, Paul knows from teaching this to others how people always respond. What do people always say as soon as you say that? They object and they say, how can God blame a person if God is the one that didn't draw them? Well, the answer is very simple. It's because it's wrong for us to go away from God. We're guilty. We don't deserve to be drawn away from what we naturally gravitate to. That's how election works. God draws us away from what we naturally gravitate toward and brings us into His salvation. When God elects someone to salvation, He is doing what, according to verse 15? He's choosing to have mercy on that. He's choosing to arrest them in the direction of destruction in which they go away from any salvation, away from God and away from salvation. Verse 15, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. In other words, God is under absolutely no obligation to have mercy on any member of the human race now that we have turned against Him. Understand that when God has mercy on someone to save them, He is doing something that is extremely extraordinary and beyond the pale of any reasonable expectation. We're not talking about something like the mercy that you show, that you ought to show when a person's hungry and you feed them. I mean, that's an obligation. You know, we're talking about the kind of mercy that goes to hell for someone else who hates your guts and who would kill you if they could get at you. We're talking about that kind of mercy. Let me die for that person who hates my guts and would like to get rid of me if they could. Even though He's Almighty God, you want to get rid of Him, let me go and die for that person. All God has to do to harden a sinner is to leave them to go in their own way. Who can find fault with Him for that? That's what He did with Pharaoh. He raised him up, giving him great power and authority, and He did not give him grace. Instead, He took off his restraint. There was even restraint on him. God gradually took that off so that Pharaoh is hardened more and more until he became ridiculous and refused to let Israel go because his hatred and malice toward God was so great. God made Pharaoh powerful so that he could show His glory to His people in delivering them from Pharaoh who refused to release them. It was a baby lesson, we might say. It was a lesson that should have been obvious. Of course, God is mighty and can deliver His people from mighty King Pharaoh. Of course He is. Why did God need to have a lesson like that? Because even though it's obviously true that God is like that, we don't see clearly God's divine power. And so therefore we need baby lessons as His people to teach us. We don't know His glory. Paul explains that God can do what He wants with us. He's the potter and we're the clay. If He chooses to display His mercy by saving us, He can do that. If He chooses to show His wrath by hardening us to go our own way, He can do that. We have no claim on Him, especially as a fallen human race. But even before we fell, there was no injustice in His leaving us to go our own way and rebel, that His purpose, His great purpose in demonstrating the glory of His mercy and the glory of His wrath might be accomplished. To demonstrate that to us, it required a fall. And that's how God chose to do it. And Romans 9 talks about the demonstration through vessels of mercy and vessels of wrath. He will have mercy on whom He will, and He will harden whom He will.